Welcome to the Asian Women of Power podcast, where your host, Kimchi Chow, shares tips, tools, insights, and strategies on how you too can create the life you love with freedom, power, and choice. Kimchi will show you how to break free of your cultural boundaries and boldly live the life of your dreams. If you are ready to transform your life, please go to www.asianwomenofpowerquiz.com and take the quiz. You may qualify for a free discovery session with Kimchi. And now, here's your host, Kimchi Chow.
Where do you go after you die? Is there a previous life's karma that you are experiencing in this lifetime? Is there a heaven and hell? Can we change our destiny? Well, if you have been wondering about these similar things, I invite you to listen closely to this interview. Our next guest has many practical answers for these questions because he had some conversation with Jesus and Buddha. He also had some memories of previous lives that span more than 6,000 years through meditation. I know you will learn something new from this interview. So please help me welcome Kelvin Chin.
Thank you. Thank you, Kimchi. Thank you very much.
So Kelvin, please share with us what you remember from your childhood experience and how it leads you to become a meditation teacher.
Yeah, so I was born in the United States. I was born in Boston, and I grew up in a suburb of Boston called Norwood, Massachusetts. My mother was born in China, and she came over when she was 3 years old in 1929 with her mother. They took a boat over, and they landed in Seattle, I hear, and then they took a train across to Boston. My grandfather, my mother's father, had already been here in the United States with his father. In the very early 1900s, my grandfather actually went to high school. Of course, he was born in China, but he went to high school in Revere, Massachusetts when he was, I think he graduated high school, but he went there for like 2 years or something when he was 16 years old, something like that. Then, as you know, many marriages, especially then, probably maybe all marriages were arranged marriages in China. So his father arranged and so forth, and the marriage between my grandmother and my grandfather went back to China, got married and so forth, and my mother was conceived there. And then my grandfather came back to work with his father, my great-grandfather, here in Massachusetts, in Boston, near Boston somewhere. And then he saved up money and then called for my mother and her mother to come. So that was in 1929 when my mom came over. And then my father was born here in the United States, in Chelsea, Massachusetts, but his parents and so forth are also Chinese, born in southern China. So I grew up in Norwood, Massachusetts, and so to give you a sense in terms of the ethnic upbringing, we went to Chinatown to see my grandparents pretty much every weekend. As a young child, I would stay overnight, and I'd help my grandfather had a noodle factory. He had many people know, if anybody is listening from the Boston area, even the New York area, his noodles were so delicious. I would go and help making noodles when I was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I'd stay over for the weekend. But his noodles were so amazing that he supplied all the Chinese restaurants in the Massachusetts area, many of them in New York City, and he even shipped some down to Washington, D.C. So that's how amazing his noodles were. And he always told me his secret was a little bit more eggs, because that's the first thing that everybody else would take out because it's the most expensive ingredient, right? Anyway, so I would go there on weekends in Chinatown and help my grandfather with his noodle factory, which was, quote unquote, factory was him and my grandmother. And then my aunts and uncles who were growing up, they were not that much, a little bit, 10, 15 years older than I was. But so we would all work in the noodle factory and I would help as, the little baby guy. But I grew up in Norwood, Massachusetts, and we were the first ethnic minority of any any ethnicity to move into that town of 20,000 people, suburb of Boston. So we were the first ethnic minority. I jokingly tell people the other ethnic minority that was already there were the 4 or 5 Jewish families. That was it. It was Irish Catholic, Italian a town, basically. So I grew up there, and I had I would say, a fairly normal upbringing. Um, um, I didn't have a lot of racial issues. I did have some, because I think any of us Asian Americans run into it at times somewhere along the way. But I think somewhat mitigated by the fact that I was so tall. And Kimchi, I'm 6'2", barefoot, and I think that helped. And the fact that I could play music well, and I was good in all sports. So I kind of checked all the boxes off in terms of social acceptance, and I was good. And I had lots of friends, some of whom were very good academically, and some of them weren't. And it didn't matter to me, because to me, it's about what's inside the person. Are they a good person? And do they have a good sense of humor? Those, I think, when I was growing up, those were the main 2 things that I look for in somebody. And I think sense of humor, now that I think back, now 60 years I look back now, sense of humor is a sign for perspective. Does the person have perspective on life? Even as a little child, I recognized that as a good trait in people. And for some reason, I resonated with those people, and they tended to be the more loving people, the more open people, the ones with the funny sense of humor, and the ones who could laugh about themselves too. I think that's a fundamental trait to look for in people as you're picking friends and so forth. Do they take themselves too seriously? I kind of stay away from people like that. Anyway, so went through school there, and I graduated high school. I was, I think, the first ethnic minority to graduate from that high school in the history of the town. I graduated #1 in my class, and I went to Dartmouth College, and up in New Hampshire, and then I went to Yale Graduate School. I actually studied East Asian languages and literatures. So interesting for your Asian uh, audience here. So when I grew up, my mother, so many Asian Americans in my generation have the same story. Their parents did not want us to speak English with an accent, and so they chose to not teach us Chinese. It was all highly intentional, and so they spoke Chinese. My parents did. When they didn't want us to know what they were talking about. Well, they were talking about, they didn't have to talk about us behind our back. They could talk about us right in front of us, and we had no idea what they were saying. So it was really good for them. And then, and of course, they were thinking, oh, we don't want the kids to have an accent, so we're not going to, teach them Chinese. I learned a teeny little bit at my grandparents' on the weekends and so forth, but then I would forget it, because I'm in with all these American kids, obviously, no other ethnic minorities at all in my growing up. But then when I was at Dartmouth, I had to take another class, and I was a French major. I had already taken 7 years of French before I went to Dartmouth. So I was in advanced French when I got to Dartmouth as a freshman. I became a French major, and I studied psychology in French, because I didn't like the psychology that it was all behaviorist, Skinner, B.F. Skinner, and so forth, behaviorist theory at Dartmouth. So I wanted to be more humanistic oriented in terms of psychology. So I studied that in French. Because I was so advanced in French, I created my own major in French that was basically a psychology, fundamentally a psychology major in French. But I had to take another elective when I was a junior at Dartmouth. And I thought, well, I'm Chinese American. I don't speak Chinese. I've always wanted to learn Chinese. My parents won't teach me Chinese. So I'm going to take Chinese. So I took Chinese at Dartmouth because, it checked all those boxes. And I thought, great. So I learned Mandarin Chinese at Dartmouth. I studied Mandarin, and I did very well at it. And one of my professors, Jonathan Mirsky, Mirsky, people can Google him. Jonathan Mirsky was one of my Chinese professors, Jonathan and Alex Levin. Jonathan Mirsky went on, and I think he may still be in London. I've been trying to reach him. he left Dartmouth as a Chinese professor and became an international policy expert with a focus in Chinese. And he's a writer for The Economist, or at least he used to be, a major international journal. But Jonathan Mirsky was with Henry Kissinger and Nixon in 1972 when they opened up China. He was in the first group after Nixon and Kissinger opened up China, and so he came back to Dartmouth and he told us it was like amazing. You know, he was in the first ever Western group to go to Beijing, and he, you know, he met with all the leaders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and Zhou Enlai and so forth were there, et cetera. Mao was there, et cetera. So it was very, really emotionally engaging as well as intellectually engaging for me as a student. It wasn't just an academic, it was academic, of course, but it had all of this other cultural richness to it and historical richness to it, because we were in the classroom with Professor Mirsky right when he came back from that whole experience in China. So it was so I kind of got enamored by the whole Chinese studies thing, even though I was a French major. And so I applied to a PhD program at Yale and I got in, East Asian Languages and Literatures. And so 2 people got accepted to the program that year, me and this other guy. And Kimchi, you know a little bit about my history. I'm the alternative guy. I'm the guy when there's a fork in the road and everybody's going left, I take the right fork in the road, right? So the other guy in the program, Jim Feinerman, I probably met him twice during the PhD program there. He continued and finished his PhD. He went to law school. He became an international law school professor at Georgetown University, and he's probably retired by now. But he went that left fork in the road, the traditional route. I went the right fork and I left the program. And all that time, I had been, as you know, I had been meditating since I was 19 years old. I learned meditation, and we can talk about that journey. But that was, I had continued to teach meditation while I was at Yale. That's the road I went off on when I left Yale. And I got a master's degree. My director of graduate studies learned meditation because of me. He wrote me a letter when I was teaching meditation in Asia after that, and thanked me, which was interesting because I think I had probably a total of 15 minutes of 3 conversations, total aggregate time of 15 minutes the whole time I was there at Yale. But for some reason, I left an impression with him about meditation. So that's the growing up part.
Yeah, wow. So what inspire you or motivate you to keep on practicing and teaching meditation, even you have to, manage or handle the professional career?
Right. Good question. So as I said, I learned meditation when I was at Dartmouth. I was 19 years old. And at that point, I learned TM, Transcendental Meditation. And I studied personally, directly with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi a number of times. People know him because he taught the Beatles to meditate in 1968 and so forth. And Transcendental Meditation became very, very popular, especially in the 1970s in the US and then throughout the world. So I became one of his international leaders in that organization for about 10 years before I left the organization, when they went off in a different direction. But it helped me a lot. So I continued doing the meditation. My anxiety level, I was very stressed when I was in college, and it was very, it's a high pressure Dartmouth. Everybody graduates number 1, number 2 in their class. So what? And so it's very high pressure. And I jokingly but seriously say I'm one of those students that actually has to study for the exam. Some of these guys would just be like, show up at class and every once in a while, and they'd show up and they'd ace the exam. I actually had to work. So it was very stressful for me. And I learned to meditate. My anxiety just plummeted. It went away. And then I excelled as a student because of that, of course, because it frees up more of my mind. My mind is not all stressed out so much. My memory improved, my ability to focus in my classes and pay attention and follow the train of thought. All of that stuff improved after I learned to meditate. So, but like you say, I've continued to meditate, and I've continued teaching meditation after I learned to teach in 1973. I've continued to teach meditation all these years, even through all my corporate and legal career jobs over the last 30 years, these last 3 decades, because the meditation is such an integral part of helping me perform well in my work and engage with my family, my children, and so forth, and my loved ones, that I've continued to teach it with other people, through all those decades, even on the side, having a 60, 80 hour a week job in senior level executive positions. Now I'm doing it, as you know, full time for the last 7 years again. Now I'm teaching meditation again full time and doing my afterlife work and so forth, helping people with overcoming the fear of death and fears and all kinds of anxieties and so forth is my focus now, as you know.
Yeah, that's lead to the next question that I have. So
Mm,
you mentioned about the book Overcoming the Fear of Death,
yes,
and you also guide people through their own beliefs
yes,
so that they won't fear death anymore.
right.
Would you briefly share the 4 beliefs and how you work with these people on each of those beliefs?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the title of the book is, as you say, Overcoming the Fear of Death. It's available online, everywhere online, Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and wherever. Just people need to Google it. But I came up with these 4 beliefs in a conversation with a good friend of mine, because we were talking. See, let me just go back first and what happened to me and why I became interested in this, or I guess interested is the word. I back-ended into the death and dying area when my mom died. My mom died in 1982, my 3rd year of law school, and it was such a shock to me emotionally. And I had already been meditating for 12 years at that time, but still, I'm a human being, and I was very close to my mom, and she died very suddenly of cancer. She was asymptomatic, almost right up to the end, and so she died very, very quickly. And so all of a sudden, she's gone. So how do I deal with this? It was just such a shock that I was forced almost, just forced by circumstances to deal with this figure out how to deal with this in some way. That's what got me into the whole death and dying thing. Was a very personal experience that shook me, and so I figured out, just not from studying and not from going to even a psychotherapist, which I do recommend that people do. Psychotherapy is great, but I didn't I didn't know what it was then, and so I just self-helped my way out of it. And then I started talking to people. Like if you were around there, if you were in my law school class, I would say, Kimchi, how you doing? And you say, good. And you say, how you doing, Kelvin? I say, well, I'm doing okay. Oh, but my mom just died. And then boom, you'd start telling me all kinds of stuff about, relatives or friends or somebody that you had lost that you would not normally have told, but for me volunteering about my mom. And then that's what happened. And just little by little by little, once a month, once every few months, I have a conversation like that, or maybe, and then it got to be once every couple of weeks. And then people started having friends call me up. And this is, I was one of the first people to have an answering machine. This is 1982, right? So I had an answering machine. People would call me up, and after that, in the mid 80s, in the late 80s, and so forth. And I just started helping people. That's how it happened. So, but when the reason I came up with these 4 beliefs, to your question, the reason I came up with these 4 beliefs is to figure out some way to talk about death and dying that's not just a cultural or religious way of talking about it. And so because I was talking to people back in the 80s, 1980s, and it was like, people would disagree. It's like, no, I think this is what we happen when we die. Oh, no, this is what we happen. Oh, there's nothing that happens when you die. When you die, you're done. That was my dad's belief system, stick me in a box, throw the dirt on me, I'm done. That's what my dad would say. That's the quote from my dad. So people have all these different beliefs, and which is fine. So I thought, but how can we talk about it without arguing about what your beliefs are about death? So I was talking to my friend George, and we came up with these 4 beliefs, and we said, you know what? This makes sense. These are kind of the underlying beliefs about all the cultural and religious stuff that's out there. And so the 4 beliefs are this. One of which I just told you, my dad's belief, the science belief, no afterlife, one life, that's it. The brain and the mind are connected, period. That was my dad's belief. Many people have that belief in the world. Okay, second belief, I call it the fear of continued existence. In other words, you do believe that there's an afterlife of some sort, um, but there's some fear. And the fear may be there for different reasons. And I talk about with my clients, I talk about that, in the conversation. But first we got to figure out where they're at in the belief system scheme of things, right? Because I always talk about things through their belief system because it's about them, not me. I help them through their belief. I don't ask them to change their belief. And so the third belief is belief in an afterlife, but no fear. So they may even be looking forward to an afterlife experience, whether it's heaven or Valhalla, they call it Elysium, they can call it whatever, depending on what cultural kind of background they have in the belief system. And the fourth belief system is reincarnation. It's past lives, future lives, the fact that people can come back, that there is an afterlife, and they can choose to come back in a different physical form and continue their personality, my experience, and we can get into this, but my experience is that our personality continues from body to body, even though we have a physical different body, in different lifetimes. So that's the fourth belief system. Everybody falls somewhere in that spectrum. Everybody in the world. Doesn't matter where you live, what culture, what religion you have, what language you speak. Everybody falls somewhere there. I'm working now with people from 41 different countries in the world because, as you know, I work video conference like this, or with people, so remotely, and so it's very easy. But everybody falls there, somewhere there. Now, sometimes people are what I call fence sitters. They're like in between belief systems, and that's okay. That's okay. And so I help them figure out where are they first, and then let's talk about it. And then depending on where they're at, I talk about it through their lens, their belief system filter. Okay?
Wow. So is your dad still alive?
No, my dad died in 1999. He was 80 when he died.
Okay. So
Yeah.
did you help him go through the dying process easily?
Yes. So it's interesting you asked that because when my mom died, as I said to you earlier, I was just new at this. I was just in such shock. So I was not really, I didn't help my mom. I was just so freaked out myself and just dealing with it emotionally and grieving and so forth. My dad, very different. And I helped him. And I didn't try to change his belief system at all because he was very, very set in his thinking. And that's fine. But I helped set everything up for him, the trust for his condo and so forth. And he didn't have a lot when he died, a lot of assets or whatever, but I helped everything be very, very smooth for him. And I helped him. He told me, okay, here's a list of 40 people, because he knew he was going to die. He had colon cancer. And so he knew that they had operated and so forth. And if it was going to come back, they said in a couple of years. And of course, 1 year and 360 days, literally, later, it came back. He knew he had only a certain amount of time after that second diagnosis. And so he gave me a list. And he said, these are the people, so forth. He knew I would take care of everything. My father was a World War II veteran. He wanted to be buried at the U.S. military cemetery in Hawaii. He and my mom loved going to Hawaii. They never lived there, but they loved going there. And so my mom's ashes, she asked to have her ashes dropped in a current headed towards China, because in 1982 it was still, fairly difficult to get into China and so forth. You could probably get in, hard to get out again. Anyway, so it was like, so she said, get the ashes go in that direction. My father wanted to be actually buried there in the military cemetery. So I helped him arrange all of that stuff. But here's an interesting experience that you could say I helped him with in a couple of different ways specifically. One time, and this is a good teaching experience for your audience. Because I tell people even now, in fact, tomorrow I'm going to be doing a video conference training with doctors and nurses at one of the New York City hospitals that's all COVID-19. And they're dealing obviously with a lot of patients dying or afraid of dying. So I'm going to do a workshop with them. And I'm going to tell them a brief version of this story that I'm going to tell you right now. Because sometimes when people die, very often when people die, and some of your listeners probably have had loved ones or friends who have died, they will see things that we can't see. They will see, oh, there's dead great-grandmother. Oh, there's, and they won't even say dead because as far as they're concerned, the person's still alive. They can see them and talk with them and so forth. Or there's Jack, my friend Jack, or there's Susan or whoever, or Dee Dee, etc. And so, they see these, the nurse, the doctor, or you or I may be in the room. Maybe we don't see what they're seeing. My instruction to everybody is to treat them normally. Do not treat them like they're hallucinating, even though maybe they are on so much morphine or different medications. Maybe they are hallucinating. We don't know. We cannot tell. The point is to be respectful and acknowledge what they're experiencing, whether we're experiencing what they're experiencing or not. Does not matter, okay? That helps ease people's fears and anxieties. That helps them ease their transition into death, whatever happens after they die. Whatever our belief system is, it doesn't matter. So in that same way, my father was in a wheelchair, mainly because he couldn't get around very well. I mean, he could still technically walk, but it was very difficult for him in those last few days. So we moved him to my house, and he would sit in a very comfortable chair in my living room, and then would go to the wheelchair to go to the bathroom and so forth, back and forth. And the hospice nurse came, and then all of my siblings flew in from different parts of the country because we knew it was going to be quick, probably 48 hours or less. And my dad was, and I invited all his friends over. Anybody, I let all these friends of my dad's know to tell their friends and friends of friends that knew him, come over, you want to see him, you have a short window, so come over to my living room. So I had 20, 30, 50 people in my living room saying bye to my dad. So it was like everybody's lined up going to see my dad. Now my dad had to go to the bathroom. So on the way to the bathroom, we're pushing his wheelchair. And then he said, oh no, hold on. I got to do something. And so he said, and he got out of his wheelchair and he was on my carpeted living room floor on his knees. So I got down on my knees next to him and I said, what's up, Dad? And keep in mind, he was on so much morphine that most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, he was asleep. So this is one of those moments when he kind of came to because he had to go to the bathroom, right? And so he was conscious, he was aware, able to talk. He's down on his knees, I'm down on my knees next to him, and he says, oh, I need the scissors. I need to cut that clipping out of the newspaper. There's no newspaper on the floor. It's just my rug, right? But he's seeing newspaper on the floor. He's got to cut the clipping, and he can't find the scissors to cut this clipping out of the newspaper. With some article, he said he's looking at. I said, okay. So I just went like this. And I said, here, Dad, here's a pair of scissors. I went like this with my hand. I didn't give him a pair of scissors. I was going along with whatever he was seeing. I gave him this, an imaginary pair of scissors, what you and I would consider an imaginary pair of scissors. I went like this, here's a pair of scissors, Dad. I gave it to him. He took it from my hand and he clipped some article and he said, great, good, that's done. And he got back up on his wheelchair, went to the bathroom. Okay. So that's, to me, a teaching moment for everybody. That's what we should be doing with our loved ones who are dying. We treat them, whatever is going on with them, we're there with them, we're present with them. That's what it means to be present with them. We're not there saying, Dad, there's no newspaper there. Yeah, you don't need scissors, blah, 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 blah. That's what some people would do. That's disrespectful to whatever they're experiencing. We're not there to try to change their experience of how they're dying. That's not our role. That's not helpful. What's helpful is to facilitate whatever experience they're experiencing, as long as they're not hurting themselves. If he's walking towards a lit flame on my gas stove, that's a different situation. Okay, we want to, we prevent somebody from hurting themselves, but in this moment, that was the right thing to do, and he relaxed. it made him feel more at ease. That's my objective when I'm helping people die. Okay. Another example with my dad, to answer your questions more, it's another specific example. I called all these people because a lot of the list of 40, 50, 60 people were long distance. They were in Boston, they were here, and they were in different parts of Chicago, different parts of the country. I called them up, and my dad would be like this, all slumped over. Like I said, 95% of the time he's asleep, he's out. But he's got so much morphine to control the pain in him. So I would dial the number, and I would say, Dad, I'm holding the phone up next to you now. George, I'd call, like, George Ruboy was one of, he was his lawyer, my dad's lawyer and close friend, lived right up the street from us, Boy Scout leaders. I was a Boy Scout. My dad and George Ruboy were Boy Scout leaders together. I called George Ruboy up and say, George, my dad's, he's passing away quickly, but I'm sitting right here next to him, and I'm going to give you the phone. I'm going to put the phone up to his ear. You just start talking, and he will come to. I'll tell you when to start talking. So I call him up, I prep him like that, and then I put the phone up to my dad's ear. I say, okay, George, start talking. And he started talking to my dad, and my dad would just be like a rheostat, like a dimmer switch on a dining room light. It would just, like, the energy would go back into him. He'd like life force would just go. You sit up. Hey, George, how you doing? He would talk just like this. How you doing? And George would say, how you doing, Henry? And my dad said, oh, I'm doing okay. The cancer's come back, but I'm doing okay. This was like hours before my dad died. Hours, single digits. Okay. And then my dad would go like this. He'd slump back down again. The call would last 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds tops. I'd take the phone because I was holding the phone. I'd say, George, that was great. He heard everything you said. Thanks for talking. A little emotional. I did that like 30 times, so my dad could connect. They could say bye. So that's another example of something that we can do. Something proactive, right?
Well, thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for those tips, those stories, because I've experienced those things too with my mom. Yeah, and then there's certain thing that when we didn't understand, right, we would say she's hallucinating, and
Right.
when we tell the doctor continue subscribe her with stronger dose for the the whatever, the anti hallucination thing, so that
Yeah.
to put her to sleep, right?
Yes.
And yeah, we just basically we did not know how to deal with it,
Right. Right.
I
Yeah.
guess.
It's a
Yeah.
it's an issue in our medical profession, and I'm not here to tell the doctors, and certainly tomorrow I'm not there to on the video conference call that I'm going to do with them. I'm not here to tell them how to practice medicine, um, but we do need to understand it better as a culture, so that a lot of things, how the family deals with it and how the doctors and healthcare people deal with it, is more consistent with what actually the patient the dying person is experiencing, um, and not try to stop it from happening, you know, because it's a very, very normal part of the dying process. And again, we don't know for sure, are they actually seeing a dead loved one or not? It does not matter. What matters is we're there. They're not in any pain. If they're in pain, then the medical provider, yeah, needs to intercede and so forth and so on. That's a different story. Yeah.
So what happens after we die?
So what happens after we die? So, and how do I know what happens after we die, right? uh, so I've had many experiences, as you said in the introduction to me. I've had many experiences on this side. I've had many experiences. I have memories of being on the other side, and I've had experiences being on this side, meaning in physical form, like I am now, Kelvin Chin, and communicating with the other side and having experiences on the other side while I'm still here in physical form. So I've had all of the above. And let's see, they started, well, I had a near-death experience when I was 21 years old. I almost drowned off of San Diego. Those of you if you have listeners in the San Diego or Southern California area, where I am, I'm here in Los Angeles, but um, they know that there's very strong rip currents off of San Diego and Torrey Pines Beach there. And so I was swimming off there with a friend, and there was nobody else on the beach that afternoon for some reason, whatever, or that stretch of the beach anyway. And I got pulled out in the rip current, and I was out about 1.7 miles. I asked a friend of mine who's a ship captain, and I told him the 300-foot high cliffs were about 3 or 4 inches tall. He said, "Yeah, you were 1.7 miles out." In a matter of 30 seconds, probably. I don't know. I wasn't timing it. I was just freaking out at the time. And I was getting pulled out by this. A rip current is a river within the ocean. There are many rip currents around the world. And they very often come in to the shore, and then they go back out to sea. And it's a river. And so you get caught in that river, and the river's moving very fast. You can get pulled out very fast. So I was out almost 2 miles. And I started swimming in, and I got tired because I kind of panicked, and I was, swimming too hard, too fast, and I was swimming directly against the current. So you're supposed to swim 45 degrees angle to the shore to increase the likelihood you're probably going to get out of the current, because the current is going out to sea. Obviously, that's just why it pulled you out. So you want to swim that way to try to get out of the current. Well, I didn't remember any of my Boy Scout rules that I had learned in swimming and life-saving class. I just was swimming, and I started getting exhausted. I started going down underwater, and I just like in the movies, you can see the water, like the water is like a foot above you, it's 2 feet above you, it's like you're starting to sink, and I'm like, oh, and then but I left my body, my mind left my body, and I saw myself for a split second, and I decided to go back into my body. So I had a nearing death experience. I didn't have the near death experience that some people have, where they are full blown on the other side and they're talking to angels or Jesus or Buddha. Depending on what belief system they have, that's who very often shows up. And Yogananda may show up for some people, or who knows, whatever, if they're followers of him, or Maharishi Mahesh, who knows, may show up, or friends or loved ones. I didn't have that. I didn't get that far into the death things experience. And the reason is I think, in retrospect, is because I'd been meditating for 2 years already when this happened. So I'd already been very familiar with my mind and body not being the same thing. Now, they influence each other. The mind and the body influence each other, obviously, but they're not exactly. I had experienced through meditation many, many times that my mind was separate, not identical with my body, in other words. I could have separate experiences mentally from what my physical body was doing. And so because of that, that gave me a perspective when I almost drowned. And I think that perspective saved my life, quite frankly, because if I had been kind of caught up in the drowning experience, I would have just kept going down, down, down another 30, 40 feet, whatever, how deep, because the water is very deep there. And then I could have just kept going down, and then by then, even if I wanted to get up, it would have been very difficult because I was so tired, so exhausted. I wouldn't have been able to get to the surface. So I think that perspective of having been meditating for 2 years literally saved my life, because I left and I decided and I willed myself, nope, back in the body, and just don't swim so fast. That's what I told myself. And I consciously decided not to swim so fast. And then I just took my time, and it took me about an hour to swim back in. I was exhausted when I got back in. I fell asleep for the college student, my friend, the girl I was with. She said I slept for about a half an hour, just on the beach, passed out, pulled myself up on the shore, far enough out of the water, just like you see in the shipwreck movies, passed out for half an hour, she said.
Okay, what's the answer? So the answer
for
what happens after we die?
So after we die, so that's that mini experience I had. Mini answer. After we die, my experience now, having had other experiences since then, is that our mind continues and that our personality continues. So I still am aware of who I am after I die. I'm still aware of who I was, and my mind continues. I take my mind with me, after my physical body dies and ends. So, in a sense, there is no death because my mind is continuing. By the way, when I say mind, some people may use the word soul, spirit, consciousness, awareness, same thing the way I use the word mind. Because I work across so many different cultures around the world, I use the word mind so it doesn't trigger any cultural or religious beliefs, because soul for some people sounds too religious to them. So I just use the word mind, but your listeners may substitute any of those words if they like that and they're more comfortable with that. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Because I'm talking about mind, huge mind, the focusing mind that's talking to you right now on the Zoom call, this podcast that we're doing together, Kimchi, and my huge, vast mind. That's all of my mind, right? That continues after we physically die, and I also have experienced that we continue to have what I refer to as an identifiable energy pattern on the other side. What does that mean? That means that if you and I die, and you and I run into each other, Kimchi, on the other side, I recognize your energy. That's what I call it, an identifiable energy pattern. I recognize your energy. You may not have the same physical, the same face and so forth on the other side, because you don't have a physical body, obviously, right? So what do we have on the other side? We still have, we could call it, I mean, physicists would call it, we have a physical body, but not a physical biological body. No biology going on the other side, but an energy body. So physicists would call that, well, you still got, something's there, right? Something identifiable. So a physicist might say, well, okay, you don't have a biological body, but you still have an energy body. Okay, I agree. I would agree with that, because there's something that's identifiable. The other, because I have seen, I've had experiences, you could call it visits, from people who are dead, visit me here on this side, in physical planet Earth side, and I see their energy body. They can show me their face or their body, even their whole body, but it's energy. It's like vibrating energy. It's like excuse me. It's like a body of light, energy that's vibrating. But I can see a form. They can show me their face, and then after I've had that experience with somebody in that form, they don't have to show me what their face looks like from the other side if they're communicating with Kelvin Chin on this side of planet Earth, because I recognize their energy. I can feel their energy. So that's why I came up with this phrase that we have this what I call an identifiable energy pattern, when we're on the other side, this recognizable. So I may not see you after we die, Kimchi, but I'll recognize your energy. Something about it, I'll recognize it as you, that's distinguished from my other friends, So we continue, and we can continue to do things on the other side. And so I have all kinds of stories. We could talk about this if you want, about what people are doing on the other side, because there's a huge range of stuff. Okay,
Yes, please do. Because,
can we talk about that?
how long? Yes, how
Yeah,
long would our mind go to the next phase, right? And what do we
yeah.
do over there,
Well,
or wherever there is?
yeah. So let's talk about all that. There's about 6 things you just said that we could talk about in that. All right. So where is that? It's right here. It's not any place far away. I called it the other side because it's not like this side. I mean, how else do we talk about it? It's not a physical reality with physical biological bodies and physical forms and sweaters and, whatever, objects like that. But there's energetic objects on the other side, and you can create that. You can see physical, what on this side we call physical forms, and the other side they may even call it physical forms, but it's energy. We would think of it as energy, but it looks like a table, it looks like a whatever. We can have experiences like that on the other side too. But it's not that far. It's not far away from where we are now, Kimchi. It's just we don't see it because it's vibrating, let's say, at a different frequency than what we're vibrating at from an atomic and a molecular level, from that functioning perspective. The atoms and molecules are vibrating at a certain frequency here where we are, physical Earth, and they're not, they're vibrating at a different frequency on the other side. But time, you say, how long are we on the other side? The short answer is as long as you want to. Basically, as long as you want. You have choice. And then you could choose to come back or not choose to come back for a long, long time. I've hung out on the other side for hundreds of Earth years sometimes between lifetimes. And in my last lifetime, when I was in World War II, I was on the other side for 8 Earth years before I came back this lifetime. That was a short time period on the other side. Some people have come back immediately. There are stories of babies dying, like babies dying with and they maybe let's say they a 2 or 3-year-old. There's stories like this. 2 or 3-year-old child dies, and while they were alive on planet Earth with their parents, they fell and they cut themselves or whatever on something. They got a scar here, or they got a scar on their on their arm or something where they fell and cut themselves or whatever. Okay, that baby dies. There are stories of that baby young child, 2, 3 years old, comes back and is reborn into the same family 9 or 10 or 12 months later, whatever, with a birthmark on the exact same arm, the exact same shape, the exact same location as where they cut themselves in the previous lifetime. A birthmark, same shape, looks just like the scar is the same exact. And moreover, the personality of the baby likes the same toys, blah, 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 likes the same TV show, the movie, favorite movie, blah, blah, all that stuff is the same. So can have transference of physical issues, obviously not a scar, but in this case, a birthmark that looks just exactly like the scar in the exact same place, but personality continuing, mind continuing, their likes and dislikes continuing, loves broccoli, hates zucchini, whatever, that kind of stuff, and they say, and it's a different physical form, obviously. So, and there are stories of that, many stories of that, like that. So back to the experience of time. So we can come back whenever we want to, or hang out for as long as we want on the other side. That's the bottom line. And so nobody's forcing you. It's like, there's no like, oh, your time's up, Kimchi. You gotta go back to planet Earth. Your 30-day vacation is up or something, or whatever. Your 30-year vacation or your 300-year vacation is up. No, you decide. When you want to come back, or if you don't want to, just hang out over there, because it's very much like the way I would describe the other side. It's like vacation. It's like vacation mode. It's like rest and relaxation. It's just you go there and you chill out, because look, think about it. You don't have a biological body. That means you don't have to eat. You don't have to feed it. You don't have to go to work to make money, to buy food, to feed it, or shelter, and all this stuff. We don't have to worry about COVID-19 viruses, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we still carry our same emotions and mind with us. So what am I doing in my work? I'm trying to help reduce people's fear and anxieties about everything, not just death and dying, but everything, right? Anything. Why? Because we take our minds with us. So I don't often tell people this, Kimchi, in my classes, but since we're talking about it, I'll mention that I'm helping people experience a more happy and enjoyable afterlife by helping them now, because we are in the continual present all the time. Our minds, we are always living in the continual present. Your and my continual present is going to be different. It already is different from 5 minutes ago, 2 seconds ago, however long ago when we started this podcast. We are now in the continual present. The present is always changing. So I call it the continual present, because to illustrate that it's changing all the time. So after we die, if we do continue, and everybody will know when they know, even people who believe in an afterlife, I always say, yeah, but you're going to find out. You'll find out for sure when you physically die. I've had experiences on the other side, but not everybody has. So I don't try to change people's belief system, as I said, but we'll find out when we find out. But my point is that in my nonprofit work, I'm helping people live for the moment they're in right then. And if they continue after they physically die, if their mind continues after they physically die, then that moment is then in heaven or the afterlife or whatever they call it. I want them to be as fear-free as possible.
Yeah, it makes sense. So what kind of form will we be? Like, reincarnate, right? Let's say we say, okay, I want to go back, but what kind of form will we be? Human, animal, or rock, or tree?
Yeah. Not so much rocks and trees, I don't think. Most people are going to choose to be human again, for various reasons. And I have theories about it. Each individual mind will make up their own decision, right, about that. Could you choose to go back and be an animal? Yeah, it's possible. You could make that choice to be an animal. Um, um, Rock or tree, I don't have any memories of being rocks or trees. I have memories of being humans, and I have memory of being an animal, and I can talk to you about that. I just had a recent, like another experience of that animal lifetime, just literally a few days ago. I could tell you about, because these memories come in bits and pieces. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle, right? It's like this 100 million piece jigsaw puzzle that you don't have the cover of the box for, so you don't know what it's supposed to look like. That's like a lifetime, and you may get two pieces that lock together. Oh, it fits, look at that. And then you get a little memory, and then you get another memory, maybe it's another 20 pieces. Wow, that's amazing. I got 20 pieces that all fit together of that lifetime. But it's a tiny percentage of 100 million pieces in that lifetime, right? So it's like these little pieces, and some of them, all the pieces, the 2 pieces and the 20 pieces may not even fit together, but it's the same lifetime. It's the same lifetime. They may not even fit together. The 22 pieces don't even fit together with each other, but the 20 and the 22 and the 20 and the 2 are separate. It could be like that. But my point is, like, we have these lifetimes. We can come back in all these different forms. I don't think rocks or trees, because I don't think that there's a consciousness there in the similar way. And what do I mean by consciousness? I think conscious awareness in order to make decisions that can change chaos. What does that mean? You know what entropy is in physics? Entropy means there's a tendency in physics for everything to become chaotic and just a big mess. For example, simple example, you do a bunch of cook a bunch of food, leave the dirty dishes in your sink, and let's say you go on a long trip for 6 months. You come back, that sink is going to be pretty nasty, right? It's just like chaos. It's just like growth of stuff. Who knows what? If you go away for 60 years and you leave the sink like that, and you have wooden dishes and stuff in there, or bowls or whatever, 60 or 100 years or whatever, you go away and you come back, you do a time travel thing or something like this, you'll come back and it's like the wood is degraded, right? It just, things go, if you don't keep them up, is the point. You just look at the forest, you just leave it, a tree falls down and you just leave it for 60, 70, 80 years, it degrades. That's the natural course of things in our physical reality. Okay, well, what does the human mind have the ability to do? The human mind has the ability to change that and take what might be considered like chaotic pieces of metal, for example, and the human mind can put them together and create a laptop. All it is a bunch of metal and plastic, really, if you think about it. You strip it down. It's metal, plastic, okay, maybe it's got some glass in it, but that's a bunch of chemical, silicon, whatever it is, silica. But the human mind, has this ability. Animals can do variations of that too, to some degree, okay? So I think that's a short answer for why I think, we would choose to come back something like that. But most people are going to come back as humans. Why? Because we're familiar with it and we like it. And we can do a lot more manipulating this normal state of what I'm calling chaotic stuff than we can as an animal, right? But I remember being an eagle, and I remember flying, and I had this memory. That memory is that knowingness of being an eagle, and the memory of flying as an eagle for a long period of time. Not just like sometimes in dreams you feel like, oh, I'm flying. No, this was a memory. I remember explicitly. I could see my wings and everything. Um, Eagles have big wingspan, right? And I could look and I could see my wings. And so um, that's an old memory from maybe 20, 30 years ago. I've had this. But recently, maybe 3 days ago, I was lying down resting after I meditate, I've taught you, you rest after you meditate. I was lying there resting in that kind of relaxing state. I'm not awake. I am awake, but I'm not wide awake, and I'm not meditating, and I'm not dreaming. I'm in that in-between state, just lying there resting. And then I just, all of a sudden, the TV screen went on in my mind, and I could see myself flying again. And then I saw the treetops, maybe about 500 feet down, and I went swooped down to the treetops, and I glided along the treetops, and I went back up to whatever, 500 or 800 feet or whatever the heck I was, and way up high, and I could see the panoramic view and the mountains and everything. No people, no buildings or anything. And but the interesting thing is, what I remembered was emotionally how I felt. So it wasn't just a vision. Very often in these reincarnation memories that I have, there's emotional content. And in this one, I had emotional content of what? I emotionally remembered, Kimchi, that how comfortable I was being alone. Because you think about it, I never thought about this until I had this experience, but eagles are alone. They're not, they don't travel in packs, or whatever. I don't know what the bird, phrase is. Flocks, flock of eagles, no. And they're doing their thing, right? And I remember being emotionally feeling very comfortable with being a solitary, having solitary existence. And it reminded me of some of my Buddhist monk lifetimes where I've lived in a monastery. I've had, as I've told you offline, I've had several Buddhist monk memories, and it reminded me of those memories, lifetimes, being very secluded and very comfortable with it, very comfortable with the seclusion. So that it was interesting that my personality as an eagle, remembering the personality as a Buddhist monk, but the emotional, not the content so much, but the emotion of it, and the comfort, the familiarity with this experience of seclusion. Yeah, an example of personality continuing, even in an animal form, right? Personality continuing, and remembering an emotional experience.
So if we come back to, if we decide to come back as a
Yeah.
human,
Yes.
that means we want to do something in this lifetime, right? Say, okay, I want to do this. I want to try this. I want to learn this, blah, 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 right?
I think so. I think people will choose to come back because they want to come back, and they want to do something. What the something is will be very, very, very different for different people, right? Because we all have free will, means personal choice. We all have different personalities. We have different likes and dislikes. We have different wants and needs. We have different desires. So for some people, coming back may be coming back to help other people like you and I do in our different ways. So maybe we want to come back and help other people. And maybe I do it in different ways, like I've done it with lawyers in my earlier careers and so forth. And I've taught meditation, and now I'm doing that full time, and now I'm people with death and dying. You help people in other different ways. That may be a reason to come back. Not everybody wants to come back to help other people, though. Some people just want to come back and have fun, and that's what they want to come back. Or some people, I jokingly but seriously said this to one of my clients because she loves ice cream. I said, you love ice cream. How many people, Tasha, maybe they're just coming back because they miss soft serve ice cream. And they go, I miss that soft serve ice cream. I go back to planet Earth. And then boom, and they forget about everything else that comes along with coming back to planet. Oh, you mean I got to get a job now? I got to pay for the soft serve ice cream? I just miss soft serve ice cream. I kind of say that jokingly, but seriously, that there's this huge range, is my point, of why somebody might choose to come back. Or they may choose to come back for a loved one on a very serious note, a very serious desire, because that loved one they miss, and they want to be with that loved one again, because maybe that loved one is not even from the previous lifetime. Maybe it's from many lifetimes before, and for whatever reason they haven't connected, et cetera, et cetera. Because even if we want to connect with somebody, it doesn't always work out perfectly, because there are all these other millions of minds involved indirectly in choices that everybody is making all the time, right? And there are people that we don't even know. I mean, look, our local, state, and federal government makes laws, and so we don't know the people who are making the laws really, but that affects us, and it affects our choices and so forth. So all of those things are at play at any given moment. But coming back could be a reason, a very intimate reason could be because I really miss being with that person, and I want to explore what it's like being in a personal, intimate relationship with that person this lifetime. You know? Or see my kids again, because I miss my children. I want to be with my children again. And maybe they come back as my children, or maybe they come back as my parents, or my friends, and they used to be my children, and now they're friends of mine, or clients of mine. I teach a lot of people. I don't tell them this, but some of them I recognize them as my children. I don't want to freak them out.
Really? How do
Yeah.
you, so basically you recognize as a personality from
Yeah,
a previous
well,
life?
it depends on the person. It probably and it undoubtedly also depends on me, uh, but how much I'm perceiving, it varies. Sometimes I just have a feeling or a knowingness about it, or sometimes I have a feeling and I'm not sure whether they're my children or were they were just friends of mine or whatever. But we have had a previous very close connection of some kind. I don't know, it was family or friends or whatever, and I don't know which which subset within that either. So sometimes it's very often like that. Occasionally, it's more specific. That's kind of rare.
So you have experienced multiple, like hundreds of past lives before, right? And that
Well, yeah,
span thousands of years.
yeah. I remember 20 to 25 different lifetimes.
Okay.
I've had, I don't know how many. I've probably had thousands, but I have memories from 20 to 25.
All
Yeah,
right.
and they go back 6,000 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember the key lessons for those lifetime that you have experienced?
Some of them. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Is there a key lesson from a lifetime that we're supposed to remember? I don't think there's a key lesson. Um, there is, in other words, there's not there's not some organization somewhere saying, okay, Kimchi, you're going to go down and you're going to have this lesson. No, you kind of figure it out as you go, and I figure it out as I go. Now we can decide before we get born, okay, I really want to do this. I really want to fix this relationship. Or I would really like to do this. Or I'd really like to help people in this way through my teaching. Or we can have that kind of conversation with ourselves. And we could even have that conversation with other people on the other side, right? And I have stories about that. But, where we kind of have a little group meeting, a committee meeting, and then decide and say, okay, and then I come down, and then I try to make it happen. So that can happen, but I don't think there's like somebody telling you, Kimchi, this is your life purpose or whatever. This is what you got to do. But my thing is, I personally, because you know me, you know how I think, I try to learn from stuff. Not everybody does, but that's my thing, because I have an emotional need to understand things. So I like learning. I like understanding stuff. It emotionally makes me happy. And so that's why I do it. And so for me, in my lifetimes, I've always tried to learn something from my lifetimes, sometimes many things from one lifetime. In this lifetime as Kelvin Chin, I hope I'm learning more than one thing. But I hope I'm learning lots of things. But in my past lives, yes, I've extracted certain things from some of those past lives. For example, The one I talk about in my book. Oh, by the way, this is my book. This is a copy of my book. So this is what it looks like if people are looking for it, Overcoming the Fear of Death. So in my book, I tell a story in here about one of my lifetimes as I call it it's my Carthage memory, right there. So if you have my book, it's on page 124. But I talk about my Carthage memory where I was a slave. I was African, and then I was enslaved by the Carthaginians, and I fought as a slave for them, rowing in one, those boats, on the Mediterranean, in a war with Rome. That's all I knew. Well, the first memory I had, I didn't know that anything about where or anything or when it was. My first memory was I was dying on a piece of wreckage on what I thought was the ocean because I couldn't see any land. And it was very hot, and I was dying because I was thirsty and hungry, and and I was probably thirsty and hungry for many, many days by the time I'm having this memory in that lifetime. And so then I had other memories of that. And then I remembered Rome. I remember what our ship looked like. I started looking things up. This is the following the breadcrumbs tip that I give people if they ever start having memories like this. They can follow these breadcrumbs. So I followed the breadcrumb. I looked up what these ships looked like back a long time ago, and I just looked through a whole bunch of ships. And I thought, oh, that looks like the ship that I was on. And then, oh, we were fighting the Romans. Oh, I was probably a slave. I was African, clearly, because I could see my skin. It was very, 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 very dark, black, brown, black skin. And I almost died. Well, what did that lifetime teach me? That lifetime taught me that my willpower of my mind was really strong, and that I willed myself to stay alive on that piece of wreckage for a very long time. I'm not sure how long, but it was a very long time. I remember I could easily have given up and died, just like in the drowning experience, right? I didn't realize when I had the drowning experience this lifetime when I was 21 years old, that's what I was drawing from. Emotionally, I was drawing from that memory of dying, almost dying. I didn't die. That's the point. My willpower kept me alive 2,300 years ago in that war between Rome and Carthage when I was a slave. Okay? That emotional memory of and remembering the willpower, it indirectly, now this is now 2020, I connected the dots. I didn't realize this in 1972 when I was almost drowning, but that's where that memory fed me, because my willpower kicked in and I swam slowly to shore for an hour and saved my life in 1972, right? So that's an example. Another example is I've been laid off from my job 5 times since I was 50 years old, raising a family of 4 and 2 little kids and everything. I was the sole breadwinner. That Carthage memory has fed my willpower to survive financially through horrific times. The year 2000, remember everybody's laid off. 2008 again. I got laid off again in 2013. I mean, I 5 times since I was 50 years old. That Carthage memory, the willpower to survive, the strength of my mind, that's what's pulled me through.
That's awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
So, do you believe in reincarnation? Of
Yes.
course, right? Because you
Yes.
experience it.
Right. I've had memories, and it just spontaneously happened. People sometimes ask, well, how does that happen? For me, it was just automatic. It just spontaneously started happening. 1977 was the first time. I had been meditating 7 years. I had never read any books about past lives. I didn't know what intellectually, I knew what reincarnation was, but I didn't know anything more than the word definition. I had never read any books about spiritual stuff like that. I never seen any movies or I don't even know we had videos. We didn't have videos back then. That was 1977. But, I didn't have any external knowledge about it, is my point. My experience purely came internally from me. So I was really very naive and a neophyte about all of this. You know, I'd never read it, studied anything. I'd always thought it was just, when I'd heard people talk about it, I always thought they were making it up. I just kind of poo-pooed it. You know, I said, yeah. I was very sarcastic about it, quite frankly. For, you know, before I had my own experience. And then I went, whoa, you know, so that's that kind of thing, you know, is what changed my belief system, is purely based on my own personal experiences. To this day, I haven't read any books about past lives. I have not read any books about past lives. I just am not interested. I have so many experiences of myself to explore. It's just like, why do I want to read somebody else's past lives? Like, oh, you know, I'm just like, I'm still wading through. I'm just wading through all of my experiences, trying to, you know, interpret them and so forth. Learn.
Yeah, have you tried or have you ever thought about having a life regression?
My own past life regression.
Yes, like
Yeah, I
working
mean,
with somebody so that they
yeah,
can guide you and get, you know, that you can come, you know, to see that right away, instead of the, you know, instead of relying on yourself and depend on whenever it come, because you don't know when it will come, right?
yeah. Maybe I've thought about it, but I've never done it because I don't know. Like, who cares? I have just so much, and so much keeps coming. It's like, why? It's like I have so many library books already sitting on my floor. Why do I need to go to get the library and go get another 50 books? You know, I got 50 books sitting on my floor I haven't gotten to yet. I can't read them, you know? So why do I need to get more books? So it's like, you know, so it really has no value for me. I can understand why people would do it. And you know, people want to do that. I encourage them to do it with somebody who knows what they're doing. So I'm not discouraging it. I'm just saying personally, it's like, there's no real need. And plus, I've had outside corroboration from some of my experience, about some of my experiences from other people, um, that who didn't know me, so who are not doing past life regression with me, who just have said, "Oh, where there's this meditation teacher guy, and he's in our organization. By the way, this was 1973. I heard about this recently, that this man named Charlie Lutz. Charlie Lutz was one of the very early, maybe one of the first people Maharishi Mahesh Yogi taught meditation to. Charlie Lutz had already been involved in other meditation techniques before that, and other schools of spiritual schools before he met Maharishi in 1959. I think he met him. And so he was one of the first people. But in 1973, I just heard about this maybe a month ago. I heard this story that Charlie Lutz was telling people about a meditation teacher who was in the TM organization at the time, who was um, who was the soul, who had been both um, Frederick the Great and the Apostle Peter. And that was 4 years before. 4 years before I had my very first past life memory. So I didn't even know this guy Charlie Lutz. I never heard him talk. I never read any of his lectures. I never saw any of his whatever recordings. Nothing. I knew who he was. I knew his name, but I never. And he was telling stories about this person who was a TM teacher. And so the person who told me this recently, a month ago, always thought, because I just met this person recently, who told me this story, he always thought that I was the person who told Charlie Lutz that I had these past life memories, and that Charlie Lutz wasn't saying my name, but he was telling people this in his lectures in Los Angeles when I lived in Boston. I didn't know Charlie Lutz at all. I'd never talked to him. So he somehow separately had insight or memory or awareness that I had incarnated this lifetime, and I was a TM teacher somewhere in the TM organization. I don't know if Charlie knew me, but Charlie was there 2,000 years ago also. Charlie happened to be the Roman centurion who was at Jesus's crucifixion the whole time, standing there. So when you read in the Bible about the Roman centurion who was with Jesus, it's this guy Charlie Lutz. Charlie died, I think, in 2000 or 2001. And Charlie told us what happened, because he was literally standing there on duty while Jesus was dying and at his death. And Charlie later left the Palestine area about a year later and went back, got stationed back in Rome, and then he began teaching Jesus's teaching in Rome. He was the first teacher of Jesus's teaching in Rome before I got there or anybody else got there.
All right. So
we covered a bunch of stuff there. People are probably listening going, what the heck is he talking about? Where do we just go?
Well, yes, we go to the
Holy cow. Yeah.
Anyway,
Easter Sunday. Yeah. Easter Sunday was
this is Monday.
Yesterday.
Yes.
This is Easter Monday. So here we are talking about the resurrection. Okay.
Yes. So you mentioned that you had a conversation with either Buddha or with Jesus before, right?
Yes.
Do you remember that conversation? And what's their message? Would you share with us?
Yeah. So I've had many conversations with Jesus, but not so many with Buddha. I've had conversations with some of subsequent to Buddha, some of the Buddhist leaders, whose names I don't know, but they've come to me and shown me themselves. And so I don't know who they are, but assuming they are who they say they are, that they're some of the early Buddhist leaders. But I've never talked to Buddha himself. But I was a Buddhist monk for at least 3 lifetimes, my whole lifetime, 3 whole complete lifetimes, a Buddhist monk myself in Tibet and also in China, at least 2 in Tibet and at least 1 in China as a Buddhist monk myself. But conversations with Jesus I've had, yes. And it's, he's come to me like right after my meditation, like I told you, in the rest period kind of a thing. And then he's come to me just quiet moments, generally speaking. So not necessarily around even my meditation, but if I'm just sitting quietly alone and so forth. And so I've had some conversations with him. Well, they were very personal conversations. I've had both personal and conversations with him about what I'm doing now. So, so let's talk about what I'm doing now. So let's go back first. So John the Baptist and Jesus were around the same time 2,000 years ago, right? So I was a follower of John the Baptist first, 2,000 years ago. And John the Baptist, back in this life, in 20th century, was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who I studied with as my original meditation teacher in 1970, 71, 73, I studied with him. In a previous lifetime, he was John the Baptist. Very similar, very righteous personality, very righteous, strong, righteous indignation personality. Spiritual revolutionary, Maharishi and John the Baptist. Spiritual revolutionaries. And part of that project, we'll call it, that Jehovah and Jesus and John the Baptist, those personalities known by those names, before they were incarnated on planet Earth, had a meeting. And a number of us had a meeting on the other side. And I alluded briefly to this earlier in our conversation today, Kimchi. So we had a meeting, like a little committee meeting. We say, okay, John the Baptist, you're going to go down first, and you're going to do baptism and get people starting to think about their behavior and so forth. And you're going to do that through baptizing them and so forth, and that whole thing. So you're going to go down first, and then Jesus, you're going to go down after him. And then you're going to work together, and you're going to help people overcome the fear of death. So this was the conversation that Jehovah had with John the Baptist and Jesus and a number of us, okay, on the other side, before any of us were born. John the Baptist goes down. And because of free will and what I talked about earlier with you, and how the other minds make choices, and sometimes they make surprise choices, they make choices we don't foresee. and and Herod's wife was a little bit of a nut job, you know, King Herod, his wife, and wanted John the Baptist's head on a platter, and Herod, in order to appease his wife, killed John the Baptist, put him in prison, and then put him in, you know, cut his head off. Now, John was getting followers, so this made the local leadership, King Herod, nervous because they're worried about these religious leaders becoming too powerful, and they was worried about John the Baptist becoming too powerful, so he locked him up in prison and all that. So I was a follower, a student of John the Baptist then, with my brother Andrew, and I have memories of sitting up on a big rock promontory up on the side of a hillside. It was all desert, and I could see, and I remember seeing this long line of people winding their way down to the river, and John was in the river baptizing people, and I was just sitting up on a rock watching him do this. And then he met Jesus, and he baptized Jesus. And when he saw Jesus, I'm getting a little emotional here. When he saw Jesus, he saw them, they saw eye to eye, and John knew that who Jesus was, that he was Jesus. And that, I don't know if John remembered at that moment about the pre-birth conversation that everybody had with Jehovah or not, but he recognized Jesus. He saw his soul in his eyes, and he knew who he was. And so John told us, some of us, he told Andrew and me that we needed to go be a follower of to help Jesus in his work. And so we went with Jesus. What was your question? So we did that.
So yeah, what message does Jesus have with
So
you?
that message was helping overcoming the fear of death. So my nonprofit, what is one of my nonprofits called? Overcoming the Fear of Death. So I've been asked by Jesus and John the Baptist, aka Maharishi. Maharishi died in 2008, but he has visited me many, many times since he died also. And so in around 2014 or so, they asked me to continue this work that we all started. That got derailed by two things. It got derailed by the project back then, 2,000 years ago. It got derailed. The Overcoming the Fear of Death project got derailed by John's beheading. He got killed. That was premature, unforeseen by anybody, and not supposed to. Nothing, it wasn't supposed to happen, but it happened. And then Jesus's crucifixion, that was also unforeseen. That was a confluence, a coming together of jealousy and hatred by the Sanhedrin, who are the Jewish priests in the temple in Jerusalem, and Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who had his own fears and hesitancies and trepidations and dislike, for quite frankly, for being assigned to being in Judea at the time. But his wife said, no, take it. It'd be a stepping stone to something better. Go to Judea, because it's in the middle of nowhere in the desert. Nobody in Rome wanted to leave Rome and go to Judea, but he was given this governorship, so he took it. And he didn't want to annoy anybody in Rome, Pontius Pilate. So the Jewish priests are getting all ticked off at this guy Jesus for developing this following and teaching and so forth. And Jesus was just not a revolutionary type. Even he was a very loving, and he still is a very loving person. So the last thing he wanted to do was create a revolution, but he was changing people's thinking and about spirituality and about sin and about doing good and being and loving people and so forth, and what love meant. So he was, so in a sense, revolutionary, but not politically. And so Pontius Pilate saw this and said, the best way to make this go away so I don't get stuck here in Judea forever for the rest of my life being the governor of Judea is to let the Jewish priests have their way. And so he let them have Jesus, even though Pontius Pilate would not have killed Jesus. It was the Jewish priests, it was the Sanhedrin who were jealous. And so that's how that happened. That's the reality. That's really what happened. And so it was not foreseen. They were supposed to be working, and we were all supposed to be with John the Baptist, Jesus. All of us were supposed to be working together to help people reduce their fears so that they could live more present in the moment. And the fear of death is the big one. So we were to work together. So that's what I'm doing now. So to your question, that's what I've been asked to continue by Jesus and John the Baptist.
Okay, so you probably have been like wanting to know that question, the answer for that question, right? Is that like, what am I supposed to do in this lifetime?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Am I going the right way? Do I follow the right path?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Am I fulfilling my destiny? Because most of us, we don't remember what we're supposed to be doing in this lifetime, right? And we keep like, okay, try these things out, try that thing out, right?
Right.
But I think it's always good to know for certain that yes, you are follow the right path and continue doing it, because this is what people are needing, or this lifetime people are looking for you to give them this message. Right?
Yeah. Yes. And even without this knowledge, I have pursued my whole lifetime, this lifetime, of helping people. Because why? Because it makes me happy. So even if you don't know what you told yourself before you incarnated, or maybe even you met with a small group of friends and you said, hey, let's do this. Even if you don't remember that, we still all should be following our inner voice, our inner guidance. What guides us inside, and how do we access that? By turning within. So meditation, as you know, is a way that I teach to help access that more clearly, because we have all this white noise, we all this other chatter going on. It's like all these other distractions. But I could do this, I could do that, I could do this, I could do that. But which one do I choose? So that's true. There are choices to be made all the time. And I have made choices along the way in my lifetime. And quite frankly, if I had made the choice that I'm doing now, I don't know if I would have been able to raise a family and support them. Seriously. I mean this seriously. From a financial standpoint, there's those realities, And so I tell people when I'm coaching young people now, I tell them that I made a choice. I made a choice when I was young, in my 30s, to choose to prioritize my family as my my focal point. I made them a priority. Now, if you asked me then, what would you like to do personally, Kelvin, if everybody didn't exist in the world, blah, blah. I'd say, I'd love to be teaching meditation full time, okay? But it wasn't a reality, it wasn't a real possibility to make that kind of income in order to raise a family, all right? So I made a choice to prioritize my family as first. And that was a conscious decision, and I have no regrets about it at all. And at the same time, I still met my other emotional need, and you could call it my soul purpose or whatever you want to call it too, to help people, because I always did that in all of the work that I ever did. And those who've worked with me in all of those other careers that I had in business and in law know that about me. They would totally agree with that statement, regardless of how I was helping them. That's all what was always my goal. I was always looking out, how can I help you? And because if I help you, it helps me. I always did it in a non-selfish way, right? Now, as much as humanly possible. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. But that was always my intent, my overall intent. So we don't really need to know, okay, what's my life purpose this lifetime, and da, 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 da. And I had this agreement with Jehovah and Jesus and John the Baptist before I came, all of that. I don't ever remember that. Don't need to remember that. We need to find what makes us happy and what makes, and how can we provide more knowledge about ourselves, because to me, that's what propels us forward in our own self-development, is knowing ourselves. What do I like? What do I dislike? Why do I don't like that? What drives us? And there are these emotional patterns that drive us. We don't need to remember our past lives. We don't have to have conversations with Jesus or John the Baptist. We don't have to. But if we look at our emotional patterns, which everybody can access, and we pay more attention to those emotional patterns and try to look behind the curtain at what those emotional patterns are telling us about ourselves. That's the know thyself thing, the self-development, self-realization. If we look behind the curtain and see what's driving those desires in us, in our emotional patterns, then I think that will help us align more with what is going to make us happy at that time in our life. And that may change, because some people may, they think, well, I have a life purpose. Yeah, you may have life. I think we have life purposes, plural. Just like I think we have soul mates, plural. There may be one that's better, maybe higher up on the food chain than others. I get that. But I think we all have many, many soulmates, very many, many souls who we connect with. And some are our friends, some are our lovers, some are our children, but they're soulmates. There's this connection on a soul on a very deep level, right? In the same way, I think our life purposes exist. I don't think there is one life purpose for anybody. I think that destiny is a very it's fraught. The idea of destiny is fraught with potential suffering, because if people don't feel like they are meeting their destiny, then they feel like they've failed, and they feel like they're suffering until they can fulfill their destiny or whatever. No, life is lived moment to moment, and it's based on choices that we are making as free will, free thinking minds in the universe. I think we need to spend more of our time and energy focusing on making good choices. What do I mean by good? Good, as I said already, good that feels fulfilling to us and it's not hurtful to other people. That's where I think we as a human race need to spend more of our time, and worrying less about what is the life purpose that I have that I should be doing. Because as I said, I think its purpose is, we have many life purposes in our life that can make us happy. And we just need to choose and focus on one of them and ride that wave for as long as we ride it, and then we may hop on another one. You go on my LinkedIn, people Google me. Google Kelvin Chin and look at his LinkedIn. Look at my LinkedIn. And you go, oh my God, how many careers did this guy have? You'll lose count. But I always channeled my energy through that filter that we just talked about, helping other people, helping them be more effective and happier at what they're doing. That's always been my thing. Now I'm doing it in a more, you could argue, in a more deeply focused way, in terms of teaching my meditation, helping people with afterlife understanding and fear of death.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you just share some tips, but we didn't say that. So what would you say the 3 tips that you want people to practice today and for the rest of their life, so that they can have the inner peace and find happiness and joy in their lifetime, in this lifetime, so that they can prepare for the afterlife?
Yes, I would say the first thing is turn within. Find a way to turn within. I call my meditation, therefore I call it turning within meditation now. Find a way to turn within, whether it's through my meditation technique or some other way. Find a way that's as easy and effortless as possible, not difficult, not involving focus, controlling the mind, not involving manipulation or clearing the mind of thoughts. Something that's easy, because the easier it is, number one, you'll do it. Number two, it's more effective. You'll be able to expand your conscious capacity for mental experience and reduce your fears and anxiety by balancing out the opposite of the fight or flight response. And so that's number one. Turn within, find an easy, effortless way to turn within and connect with oneself in that different way that happens as a result of the meditation. I'd say the second thing is, don't buy into fear. Just don't. If you see TV news and they're promulgating fear about things, change the channel. You are in control of the remote. Fear is a contracting energy in us. It contracts our body, our mind, and it tenses up our body. Contracts our body, tenses it up. It restricts our creativity. It restricts our ability to love other people. It's a contracting energy. So I say do things, and when you have control, because we have more control and less control over life than we realize. Take control over what we do have control over, and let go of the stuff that we don't have control over. You know, just don't worry about it. Turn to change the channel. You know, so control our, that the fear module, so to speak. Modulate the fear. Okay, it's not helpful. And then I would say the third thing I would say is learn how to work on accepting people's free will choices. Don't try to change them into something that they're not. This is what Jesus taught about love. This was Jesus's definition of love. He said, love is accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. Accepting them for who they are, not who you wish they were. It's easy to say. It's not real easy to do. I'm not perfect at it, but it's something that I think we should all work at, that definition of love. Love, not romantic. Love is, yes, sometimes a romantic love and so forth. That's a subset of that. That's not love, big capital L love. Okay? I'm talking about capital L love. That's what Jesus was teaching. And so there are all these subsets of it, which are real, but we need to remember the big definition. Accepting other people for who they are, not who you wish they were. And then that would make us less tribal, worldwide. Tribal meaning, I'm right, you're wrong. You got to be in my tribe. You're not my tribe. Stay away. That whole thing, and look for what I used to call, or I still call, but I used to use this phrase a lot when I was in conflict resolution. I used to be a vice president for the American Arbitration Association for years. Is where's the overlap of the Venn diagram? The overlap in, that mathematical thing. Where's the overlap of the two circles? That's where we want to communicate with people, in that overlap, instead of trying to talk at them and convince them of all the stuff we disagree with. Where's the overlap of the little pieces that we agree with each other? That's an expression of what Jesus taught. That's a tactical tip on how to execute on what the principle that Jesus taught, accepting the other person for who they are, not who they wish they were. Look, where's the overlap of the Venn diagram? Where's the overlapping common interest? Have conversation there. Then you can have conversation about what you don't agree on, but you can never start having a conversation with somebody about what you don't agree on to try to convince them to agree with you, because there's no commonality. There's no real conversation. It's not a conversation. It's a lecture at the person. So if we want to have dialogue, we have to start where the commonality is. That would be the third thing I would say.
Wow, I really like the third tips. Yeah, I already practiced the number one tip, which is enroll by enrolling into your program.
Yeah.
So, and number two, I'm still like managing it. I'm still managing it, because I think it's always good to be informed, right? So so that you can make the appropriate choice, a wise choice, when you have all the information.
Yeah.
And number three, to learn to accept the people's free will. This is really, really hard, really hard, even for me, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's so hard. We don't understand why people do certain thing, and it's
Yes.
like so obvious to us that that is not a good thing to do, but still people doing that, and they still have followers, and that's why I it's hard for me to accept that, but I will do my best to control myself, just for myself, right? For my
Yes.
own benefit,
It's for
right?
your benefit. And yes, and ultimately life is, who's living your life? You are. You're
Right.
living your life. Who are you living it for? Yourself. Yes, you help people through these podcasts and so forth. But why do you do that? You do that because you like to do that and you like helping people, just like I do. So ultimately, we're helping ourselves. There's nothing wrong with self-interest. Self-interest is what we all are. We're all self-interested. But when we become too self-interested, then we become selfish. That's not good, right? And you become selfish, you become insecure. You become insecure. How do you become happy if you are insecure? You make other people around you unhappy and you feel better. That's bullying. That's cruelty, how I define cruelty. The bully gets happiness out of making other people unhappy. But he or she has the same goal that we all do, is happiness. But because they are insecure and unhappy, they depress other people around them, they feel better. But it's temporary. It's temporary. That's why, it's this cruelty idea and transcending cruelty idea is also one of the teachings that Jehovah, Jesus, and John the Baptist are encouraging us to promote. Transcending cruelty. So turning within, reducing fear, acknowledging free will, and transcending cruelty. Transcending cruelty is kind of a subset of 2 and 3.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So where do you want people to go to learn more about what you do?
Probably the easiest thing is they Google my name, Kelvin, Kelvin, Chin. They got to remember that my name has an L in it, Kelvin. And I'm named after the Scottish, he was a British physicist, the Lord William Thomson, the Kelvin temperature scale. So that's how people can remember me. Anyway, Google me, or you can go to kelvinchin.org, nonprofit, and they can access all of my nonprofits through that one website. The footer on every page of all my websites has a link to all the other. I have 4 websites. And they should join my YouTube channel. They should look for me. Kelvin Chin Turning Within is what my YouTube channel is called. Kelvin Chin Turning Within, all one word. And then they can follow my videos there. And there's lots of videos, free videos on my websites, audios and videos that people can go and learn a lot about more about what we just touched on in this podcast together, Kimchi. I know you've heard a lot of them. You can attest to that.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today. And thank you so much, Kelvin, for being here to share your knowledge with us. We appreciate that. For our viewer and listeners, please subscribe to Asian Women of Power YouTube channel, as well as Asian Women of Power podcast, so you won't miss any future episodes. Until the next time, live life loud. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Asian Women of Power podcast. We encourage you to apply what you've learned here today to make your life a little bit better every day. For more tips, tools, practical ideas, and conversations around a business, life, and relationships, so that you too can live life loud, we invite you to join the Asian Women of Power Facebook group at www.joinasianwomenofpower.com.